Welcome back to Open Line. We are talking about the Google Fiber one-touch ordinance that passed in the Metro Council. AT&T is suing Metro over that ordinance. Have with us Councilmember Jeremy Elrod, who sponsored that ordinance. We asked AT&T to come on. They were not able to send anybody tonight. Come on anytime if you want. All right, how much did you hope to avoid having to pass this ordinance? Did you think it could be done some other way?
I think it was certainly a hope, but as a Metro councilman, I don't want to ever intend to do anything at the outset that's going to open up to Metro to a lawsuit. I think that's just good government to try not to do that. However, once it was pretty evident that during the mediation talks, when they basically, from what I heard, I was not in those talks, but when they basically told the parties that were there that if Metro Council passes anything that AT&T said, we will sue you, I think it was pretty evident from then. And so the council, I think, had the way I in discussions and debate, how I framed it to the council is do we keep with the old system or the current, what was at the time of the current system of the slower system that whether intentionally or not favors whoever's in place already, or do we open up to a new system where it allows new entrants to come into the internet market in Nashville and Davidson County? But because of that, the old guard is going to still sue Metro. And I think Nashville made the right choice of, we're not going to be bullied by a lawsuit. We're going to go ahead and move. We know we're going to be sued on this, but it's the right decision for how we regulate our right-of-way, for how we're going to regulate our telecom companies, and how we're going to have competition in Nashville. That we're going to say, you can go and sue us, but it's the right thing to do for our residents and for our businesses to have more competition in who gives them internet service.
When there was this debate, I know some council members were reluctant to just, again, AT&T says the poles are their property, and we're kind of mandating what AT&T does there. Now you're saying it's the right of way, and so Metro has control over that. I guess that's essentially what will be litigated in court. You didn't see some other way, I guess speed AT&T along. Did you feel like they were truly dragging their feet, that if they wanted to, they could move this along faster, but they just didn't want the competition?
Potentially, but I think it was also just the way that the old system was in place, where you had to go through NES and then each of the providers, AT&T, Comcast. I mean, there was, I'd heard that there was, and I believe it, that there was at least one pole somewhere in Nashville that had 14 different attachments on a pole. And still with that old system, each one of those attachments, each one of those things on a pole would have to move one at a time out of the way. And if that takes, a month or 2 or 3 per attachment, if I know driving down one of my main streets in my neighborhood, Trousdale Drive, and if it was one or two of those poles, if you have to wait, 6 months on that attachment to move on a pole, that's an entire neighborhood that has to wait just because of one pole, and each one of those attachments moved out of the way. And there were timelines that they tried to put forth. That was even in the best case scenario, was that 7 to 10 month or 7 to 10 year, timeline that they would have to go through to roll out their system. And
so, yeah, there have been signs put up in people's yards expressing frustration. Is that what you were hearing?
Yes, I think that was, and I think that's very probably warranted frustration of, you're digging in my neighborhood, you're attaching poles to, attaching things to poles in our neighborhood. I think particularly the digging is probably one of the most frustrating things I think a lot of council members heard about, is you're digging in our right of way, you're digging in our street, you're hitting gas lines and that kind of thing. But there are, not every, I guess, hole that was dug for Google Fiber is probably the same, where there are sometimes that are things that are marked incorrectly, actual mistakes done by contractors. But also I think it's important to keep in mind that AT&T and Comcast have been here for decades, and Google's putting basically all the infrastructure that AT&T and Comcast have, they're trying to put all that's been here for decades, they're trying to put it in a matter of months or just a couple 3 years. So there are going to be mistakes that happen if you're trying to put in an entire internet company into a city. So there were, I know I drove down some of the streets in Green Hills that said, Google Fiber, if you're so fast, why are you still on our street? And I can only imagine how frustrating that is. But in the end, we're going to get a fiber system that has gigabit speeds that are some of the fastest in the world. And Nashville is not on the list right now of having many customers or many of our residents and homes with those kind of speeds. So I think unfortunately, some of those things are worth some of those utility lines being dug up. But I think it's also important that because of One Touch, those streets now aren't going to have 2 or 3 utility trucks coming out one at a time moving stuff on that pole. There will be one contractor to go to that pole one time and move all the lines at once. So while that digging may have taken a while, without this ordinance, there was going to be 2 or 3 or 4 trucks to each pole in your neighborhood each time, that over the course of many months, where now there will just be one truck at that pole one time.
That will be the case assuming everything goes Metro's way in court.
Yes.
We don't know how that's going to go. So is everything on hold while the court battle takes place? I mean, will we see digging in neighborhoods? Does that stop? Do we just kind of wait? Or does the digging and the old process continue while the court situation gets worked out?
Sure. The Google folks will be better to answer that than I would. But what some of the things that they told me is the NES will be putting their list together of contractors, and once that's done, they'll start hiring contractors off that list to start putting things on poles. So in 3 to 4 months, they'll be hanging fiber because the lawsuit doesn't permanently or doesn't temporarily stop this ordinance. It's still going to be in effect for it until the lawsuit is decided, good or bad.
You look at the lawsuit. It says this: the Metro ordinance is inconsistent with federal law. It said it erodes property rights. Again, they're saying these poles are their property. They've invested lots of money in these poles, and now you have Metro, a government coming in and saying you have to do this and this, and not just that you have to do this and this. You have to allow a competitor to do this and this. So when you hear that, what do you say?
I would say there are rules and regulations and even state statutes about utilities that are underground, that you have to put them in a certain kind of way, that you have to belong to the 811 system. That way you call 811, you call before you dig, that it's within the purview of local government to be able to decide what happens in the right of way. I know they've made their argument is that there's a federal law that says the FCC dictates the rules and regulations for this, and it doesn't allow One Touch. But I think there's enough. Metro Legal is going to be arguing this, and there's a lot of smart attorneys that also work for Google that say that it's allowed under FCC law, that allows local governments to do this type of thing. But also, there's Tennessee is very unique in that. There are some FCC regulations that don't necessarily apply to Tennessee because of TVA. TVA is the federal regulator as far as electric utilities go, because they're a federal agency, and NES buys their power from TVA, so they regulate how pole attachments are done in Tennessee. And so because basically you have 2 competing federal agencies, and who's going to win out? Is it the FCC or TVA? But TVA regulates pole attachments, and they don't prohibit this. So I believe that we are allowed to do it as Metro government.
So we have Louisville that's suing. We have Metro that's suing. Have they been able to go anywhere without a lawsuit? Have they been able to get this done in some other city without the need for that kind of intervention and a lawsuit like that?
No, I'm not sure. I know they're in several other cities. Kansas City, I think a city in Colorado, Charlotte, I think Atlanta. But in some of those cities, I think in Charlotte, for instance, they're having more rollouts and more customers getting signed up. And then Nashville, even though we were announced at the same time. But I think it's probably something, I would encourage probably Google to pursue, and other cities to pursue, not just Google, but other cities, whether you have Google there or not, that it's a good policy to have, because it would create an environment that encourages more investment in your internet and broadband system. Makes you more competitive to where, if you're an internet company, whether it's Google or somebody else, that if you know that city is going to be friendly to you, that you're not going to have to go through an AT&T or whoever the cable company is, that if you know you're not going to have to do that, you're going to have access to the polls that's fair, that you're going to be more willing to invest in that city, to put in. So whether, let's say, I don't know, I'm trying to think of somewhere like, say, St. Louis. St. Louis doesn't have a fiber system in place from a utility. If St. Louis were to pass something like this, then maybe that's something Google will look at in the future, or some other company.
That would be a way to bring Google in.
Yes.
Which cities want.
Yes.
It was a big deal when they said they wanted to come to Nashville.
Yes.
And so cities want that. Could this benefit some other company Is there any other company that wanted this? Primarily now it's all about Google.
Sure.
But this could have ramifications beyond Google, right?
Absolutely. There was the two main pole attachment companies are AT&T and Comcast. Google, I think, is going to be either 3 or 4 after them, but there's also another company called Level 3 that's also in the telecom business. They asked for some changes in the bill. AT&T and Comcast said there was basically nothing in the bill that could make it better, but there was another company, Level 3, which is a Fortune 500 company, does business all over the country, that said this is a good bill, that it'll also allow us to get better access to our customers in Nashville. I know they're digging along Knowlesville Road that's in my district right now. It would give them better access to poles, and they were in favor of it. Basically, it was if you're a newer company that needs access to poles that you're not already on, you would be in favor of it. So that now, because of this ordinance, Level 3 is now going to be doing more investing in Nashville and be able to roll out their product a lot faster as well. Not just Google. It's going to benefit Google, Level 3, and then if this stays in place, 10, 15 years down the line. I mean, I had dial-up when I was in high school. I couldn't imagine now that I might one day have fiber, I could have possibly 2 or 3 fiber connections to my house, or my kids would. If this stays in place, who knows what we're going to have in 20, 30 years, or the way our tech and telecom companies are really exploding and finding new ways to do stuff.
All right, we're going to take a break. If you want to call in, there's a number 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.